Professor Venkatraman Ramakrishnan, popularly known as Professor Venki, is the bearer of a huge scientific legacy. Ramakrishnan was born to scientist parents in Tamil Nadu and he grew up in Baroda in Gujarat. He also graduated from Baroda University but spent most of his life abroad. Professor Ramakrishnan is an internationally renowned structural biologist. He has also made vast contributions to chemistry alongside path-breaking work on 30S ribosomal structures. In 2009, Professor Ramakrishnan was honored with the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. He was also conferred the Padma Vibhushan in 2010. Professor Ramakrishnan is the president of the Royal Society, the world's oldest and most esteemed scientific society, the first non-white president in the body's 350-year history.
Hello and welcome. I'm Gauhar Raza and you are watching Eureka. Today we have a very special guest. We have completed 100 episodes and we had to have a personality who is special in many senses. A physicist, a biologist, a chemist. It's a dilemma for me what to call him. He is an expert in all three areas. Let's welcome Professor Venki Ramakrishnan. Thank you very much for giving us time.
Thank you.
I'm extremely thankful both on behalf of Eureka and Rajya Sabha channel that you gave us time to come here. How shall one address you? A physicist, which was your first love?
Yeah.
Biologist,
Yeah.
where you shifted, and then chemist.
So this is not a very difficult question. No physicist today would call me a physicist. I was trained in physics a long time ago.
I'm sure a lot of physicists will be very proud to call you
No,
a physicist.
I don't think so.
Well.
Actually, I would say I haven't done physics for probably 40 years. And I never was a practicing physicist. I left the field immediately after my PhD. And as far as being a chemist goes, chemistry is a very broad discipline, and part of it lies at the interface between chemistry and physics, and at the other end, a part is an interface between chemistry and biology. So I would say I'm really a molecular biologist. And so, you know, to do molecular biology, you have to know some chemistry, but again, hardcore chemists would probably not accept me as a chemist.
If I take you back to memory lanes, you were born in Tamil Nadu.
Yes.
Then you come to a very different kind of a state called Gujarat, Baroda. You don't know Gujarati as a child. You're completely lost. And then you are in Australia, and then you are in Europe. This journey where the cultural shifts have been happening, and these were major cultural shifts.
Yeah.
How do you look back at this journey from a school in Tamil Nadu to Gujarat?
You know, I don't think I noticed it too much, except I do remember, well, you know, I moved to Gujarat when I was 3. So really, you could say I really grew up in Gujarat because I hardly remember very much about my childhood in Tamil Nadu. But one thing I do remember is I didn't speak Gujarati, but I was in a playground and I realized that for the first time I couldn't understand anyone. And you know, India is a big sort of conglomeration of different languages and cultures, a bit like Europe. You know, it's as if it's like India was like EU before there was an EU, if you want to think of it that way.
Do you remember some teachers who shaped your life in Baroda?
Yes, I actually remember 3 or 4. So one of them was in high school. So, you know, my parents were scientists, but I wasn't particularly interested in science or mathematics. I mean, I did well in them, but it wasn't as if they consumed me until I reached high school. And then we had a teacher named T.C. Patel who particularly sort of challenged me. You know, he would keep posing me harder problems and, you know, both physics and mathematics. And so that sort of made me think, well, maybe, science is something I should think about. And then a later thing came when I decided to do a BSc instead of going to my medical college where I'd also been accepted. It turned out I took some national exams and didn't get into any of the IITs or Vellore Medical College. And I should say I never bothered to prepare for them with coaching classes and things like that, which I understand almost everybody does nowadays. And it's a pity because I think time is better spent on, following your interests. But anyway,
are you particularly against coaching classes?
I think so. I think the point of learning should be, encouraging your curiosity and thinking and, learning broadly. And when people spend an inordinate amount of time on exams and money, so not only are they taking their coursework, but then they're taking extra work, all of which is geared towards a single exam. That is not the way to broaden people's minds, and it also destroys these children's childhood. They should have free time. They should be free to think. When I was growing up, my parents had lots of books.
You were very interested in games at that time.
I was very interested in games. I was interested in just...
Were you ever scolded for spending too much of time on games?
No, I think, my parents were busy with their own lives. So I benefited from a kind of benign neglect, if you like. They were not worried about me. Well, I think at some points they were because
but your father wanted you to become a doctor.
Yes,
and you
that's
eventually decided against it.
That's true.
There was some give and take.
No, what I told him was that I said, if I get the National Science Talent Scholarship, then you should just accept that I should do physics. And if I don't get it, then all right, I'll study medicine. And as it turned out, I got it. And so it wasn't such a, it wasn't an issue, but he wasn't happy.
Thankful to this scheme that this scheme produced a Nobel laureate.
Well, the scheme was a very good scheme. And in fact, unlike me, many of the other students, we also had these science summer camps. I spent a summer in Chandigarh and one in Patiala. So oddly enough, both years were in Punjab. And the third year, I'd left and gone to the US before I attended the final undergraduate camp. And all my fellow science talent scholars, many of them had been accepted by the IITs and had turned it down to do basic science. And some of them, one of the most famous ones was Ramesh Narayan, who was the son of a very famous Indian biophysicist, G.N. Ramachandran. And he's now a professor of astronomy at Harvard. So, the scheme produced lots of very talented people. And I understand that scheme has sort of withered away, but it's now been replaced by the INSPIRE program from DST on a much larger scale. Right. Now, the one thing that our program had was that you had to do basic science. You couldn't use the scholarship to study medicine or engineering. The new program is apparently more flexible. I'm a little concerned that that will sort of direct people towards engineering and medicine, which they would do anyway. But, there's no question that it's working well. So,
When you were doing physics, which was your first love, and you switched over...
Well, it was actually mathematics, if you want to be honest. But everybody told me that, look, you're not doing medicine or engineering. At least do something that has some practical value and don't do mathematics. And so I was a kid. I was only 15, actually, at the time.
Are you happy that you listen to people?
No, not always. No. So I think I would have enjoyed mathematics quite a lot. I'm not sure I was really talented enough to be a first-rate mathematician. But what is ironic is this shows you how misguided advice is. None of them could have predicted the computer and information revolution where mathematicians are required for all sorts of things, okay?
Correct.
So they thought of mathematics as this sort of backwater academic discipline with no applications. And it just shows you cannot predict, what the future will bring, and you really ought to just follow your interests.
what were the big questions that you were asking at that time as a young scientist? Do you remember one or two big questions?
You know, when I went into physics, I thought I would become a high-energy physicist, you know, looking at the fundamental building blocks of matter and how forces originated and, you know, really very basic fundamental physics. And, you know, the person in India who's really excelled at that is Ashok Sen, who, as you know, is a very famous string theorist. And this is, you know, really the sort of culmination of high-energy theory. Its main problem is it's so far, you know, it's not testable. And so some people would argue whether it's a science or not. But on the other hand, it's internally apparently very self-consistent and has predicted some things that are already known. That is, things came out of the theory that we know are actually true. It's not made new predictions that you can test. As far as I know, I'm not an expert. But so that would be the kind of thing that I was hoping to do. But then, you know,
when did you get disillusioned, and
well,
why?
I went to, partly, you know, it was my choice of PhD work and the environment. And so the way I went to graduate school, you know, most students in India would finish a master's in India, then take the GREs or some equivalent, and then go to either the US or Europe. By my generation, most people were already, you know, going to the US, whereas in my father's generation, they were mostly going to the UK. But I'm hoping that will change because the UK is really absolutely first-rate in science. But anyway, what had happened was I didn't do that because my parents were in the US at the time for a short stay, and I was keen to join them. And I was 19 years old. I had not taken the GREs because I had not planned it. And anyway, I'd only done a bachelor's degree. And but a letter came from Ohio University saying they were looking for students. And so I wrote them a letter, and they said, well, actually, we're interested. Why don't you apply? And they gave me a fellowship.
That was the turning point in life?
That was a turning point, but it was, in a way, it was a difficult period because when I got to Ohio University, you see, Ohio University is not one of the leading research universities in the US. And the problem is the really cutting-edge science is only done in a very few places. Even in the US, it's not everywhere that, you know, the top-level science is done.
But you were very excited when you were offered.
I was extremely excited. And I went there, and I loved it for about a year or two when we were taking coursework, okay? But then the problem started when you had to do research. And the problem with a place like Ohio University is it doesn't attract the best students, you know, because the best students will go to Berkeley or Harvard or Caltech or places like that. And it's only the people who don't get into these places that go to places like Ohio University. And so even though the professors themselves
I'm
may be
sure
quite
today
smart,
Ohio University is very proud of you.
Yes, it is. And you know, I'm grateful to many things about Ohio. I don't want to be unduly critical, but this is the reality. The reality is that many of the faculty there are quite smart. They went to top places themselves. But in the environment where they're getting sort of the second, third, and fourth tier students, there's a limit to the kind of things they can do. So unless they're theoreticians who are very self-motivated and do all their work themselves, it's hard for them to really excel. And I worked for a very, you know, a very good physicist and very conscientious and very nice man, a Japanese professor named Tomoyasu Tanaka. But the problem is the things that he was studying were not some things that I was particularly interested in. There wasn't any, you know, this physics of the sort I wanted to do there, and he seemed like the best bet if I wanted to do theory. Now, why I wanted to do theory is also, it goes back to my interest in mathematics, but I think, you know, maybe I wasn't cut out to be a theorist. So I started working on it, and it was very clear early on that I really wasn't interested in it. So this is rule number one: do not do anything you're not interested in, because you will never do well at that. I started my PhD program when I was only 19, which is rather young. But in the end, I used that time to grow as a person and mature. So I would say the time at Ohio University was good because it gave me some time to grow up and mature and think about what I really wanted to do.
You were drifting away from academics, but you were growing as a person.
I was growing as a person, and I was learning
pace.
a lot. I was reading a lot of literature and history. I was doing everything except perhaps, work on my physics problem. And I sometimes...
We'll come to that. I'll have to take a break. Don't go anywhere. The discussion continues. Welcome back, Professor. We were discussing that how things shape up, and there are periods when you need to go out of your discipline, think about yourself, think about life maybe, grow up as a personality, and then come back to academics. When did you start working on the major problem that brought you the highest of the...
Yeah, so as I said, I was becoming sort of disinterested in my physics PhD work. And I realized that biology was at a very exciting stage. I used to subscribe to Scientific American, and I've recently started it again. And it was full of articles. Every month there'd be some new breakthrough in biology. And I also knew that many physicists had ended up becoming biologists and done extremely well. One of the most famous molecular biologists of all time was Francis Crick, and he had started as a physicist. So I knew this was a path you could take. So I applied to several graduate programs in biology. Now, many of them said, look, you already have a PhD, so we can't take you as a PhD student again.
You can't go back to lower levels.
No, but other universities said, no problem, we'll take you as a graduate student. Now, Yale University had an in-between attitude. They said, look, we won't take you as a PhD student because you already have a PhD, but let me pass your CV around to see if anyone wants to offer you a postdoc. And interestingly, two people offered me, didn't offer me, but expressed an interest. One was Tom Stites. He actually forgot all about it. Of course, I didn't. And I shared the Nobel Prize with him, interestingly enough. The other was a professor named...
For 50S...
Yes, ribosome.
Subgroup,
he did the large
ribosome.
subunit and I did the small
and
subunit.
you got it for 30 years.
Yeah, well, we both got it for lots of different kinds of things on the ribosome, but that, roughly speaking, that's right. But anyway, Don Engelman was another person who wrote to me, and so I told them, sorry, I'm not ready for a postdoc, and I really need to learn biology, because if you do a postdoc, you work in a very specialized area and you don't learn the field properly. So I went back to graduate school and I did that in California. Now, after a year and a half, I had taken a lot of courses. I even took undergraduate courses. In other words, I was willing to start at the beginning.
That's very brave of you.
Well,
to go back
possibly,
to lower classes and then you...
But look, if you want to learn a field, you have to start at the beginning. You can't sort of enter a field in the middle and expect to know anything. So I started at the beginning, took basic genetics, biochemistry, etc. And then, and I took many more courses. And in fact, when I started this program, I had a 1-month-old child. So really, and I had a 6-year-old stepdaughter. So you have to really, I'm indebted to my wife for sort of going along with this, and supporting me at a very critical time. And so anyway, after a year and a half, I felt I'd acquired enough biology background, etc., and I wasn't sure I needed a second PhD, because it would be another piece of paper, but I'd accomplished what I needed to, which was to learn the basics of biology and how to work in a lab. And at the same time, there was a Scientific American article again. There's another Scientific American article, but this time it was by Donald Engelman, the man who had expressed an interest in me, along with his colleague Peter Moore at Yale. And it was about ribosomes, and it used a technique from physics called neutron scattering. So I thought this was perfect. It used my physics background to look at an important biology problem. So I wrote to him and I said, you may not remember, but you wrote to me expressing some interest. when I didn't know any biology. But now I actually know some biology. I know how to work in a biology lab. So, would you be interested in offering me a postdoc? And he said he didn't have an opening in his lab, but his colleague Peter Moore had an opening. And Peter Moore was going to visit San Diego in California for a meeting and would be happy to see me. And we met and discussed it, and then he invited me to Yale for a sort of informal interview and offered me the job. And so that's how I began to work on ribosomes.
What were the moments of eureka in life? If I ask you that question, that was there one moment? Generally, it is assumed that scientists are very dry people, but you are not such a dry person.
No, well, there's several sort of eureka moments. One is, a eureka moment is saying, look, this is something I don't want to do the rest of my life. I need to change. And, I think I'm going to change and go and become a biologist.
But there was a moment when you danced in the lab.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm going to be famous.
Oh, I know what you're referring to. But let me get back to the eureka things. That's the most overt. I'll get to that. But the eureka moment is when you realize, the answer to some question in your life. Okay, it doesn't have to be about the scientific problem you're talking about. And so a eureka moment is when you decide, look, really, I should give biology a shot, even though I may have to go backwards. Another eureka moment came to me when I said, the ribosome is this very large machine. There's been a group in Germany working on it for 20 years, and, progress has been very slow and hard to come by. But I'm going to, on the other hand, I have lots of things that are working in my lab. I could keep on doing this, keep on publishing papers, or I could sort of give it up and go for the big thing. That's another eureka moment, because when you see, or deep down you feel that it's possible. Okay, that's, before you actually show it's possible, you have to have an idea that suggests that it's possible. Okay?
Correct.
And then the final eureka moment is when those ideas work and you realize in the data that you've actually cracked the problem. Okay? And in this case, what you're referring to is that the crystallographic method to determine the structure relies on signals from certain special atoms.
Right.
And even before we had gone home, when we were at the synchrotron where you collect these data sets, we did an initial analysis and we could see the signal from those heavy atoms or those special atoms. And that's when you know everything after that is turning the crank. And so that's
after you cracked this problem, you danced and others danced and everybody was excited.
I don't know. Nobody else danced. They thought I was a little crazy.
You did anyway.
Yeah.
Were you confident that now you are going to get the highest award in the world?
No. You never are, because,
That's why you did not believe when you reached after a cycle.
The point is you have to not think of it in terms of prizes. And the reason is there are many very important discoveries, but there's only one Nobel Prize per year, okay? But very likely there are more than one or important discovery being made per year. So you see, not all important discoveries can get the Nobel Prize, and so the Nobel Prize, has a criteria of, how important is a discovery, et cetera. And to some extent it's arbitrary, to some extent they wait for a period of time to decide, okay, was this discovery really important, or did it just make a big splash that year and then it's turned out not to be so interesting? That's one problem. Not every discovery is awarded a prize.
Can be awarded.
Even though it may be quite important. The other problem is that the Nobel Prize, because of the statutes, is only given to 3 people. And very often, especially in modern times, now when it was first awarded in around 1901, science happened in isolation. There was no internet. People didn't fly on airplanes and go off here and there to conferences and exchange ideas all the time. And so people would have an idea, and then they would start working on it, and they would work on it quite a lot. Then there would be a meeting every few years. By the time they announced their discovery, they had already done a substantial amount of work in that area. So there was no question about who did what, okay? And often it would be a single person. Nowadays, what happens is you have an idea, you you may not even have done any work on it. You may just have an idea, or you may have done some very preliminary work. You go to a meeting and you sort of talk about it with friends, or you even, announce it in a talk and so on. Immediately, several people in your field can see the next step or the next step,
So there's much
things.
more competition
Well, it's
today.
not even competition. What happens is the field just moves forward very quickly with lots of people doing things, okay? And maybe the initial idea wasn't the most important thing. Maybe something else was more important, to move it along further. So it becomes very hard to decide who were the key people who really made this happen. And that's a difficulty. Now, the Nobel Committee spends a lot of time thinking about it and figuring out which were the key ideas that made something happen. And usually they get it right, but there's always controversy. And the more science is, rapidly communicative, the more these controversies will happen. And so that's the reason why you don't think
But
of
your
it in
whole
terms of
team, to which you have given a lot of credit for your work and this prize, was very excited about you getting the...
Yeah, but this is a bit like, it's a slightly tribal feeling, It's like their chief won, So I think, and they also have pride in the sense they contributed to the work.
Absolutely.
So there is a sense of pride, and it is really one reason to accept the prize. You could say, if you wanted to be very high-minded, you can say, I don't believe in prizes, and I'm not going to accept the prize. Except, most scientists on a scientist's salary are not going to turn down that kind of money, okay? And
Would you like to sign off by giving a message to younger generation?
Yes. Well, I think, the whole business of prizes is just a distraction. Really, you should do science because it's interesting, it's fascinating, it's about the world, it's finding out things nobody knew before, it's an exciting life, and you should sort of follow your passion, and that's the reason to do science.
May I, on your behalf, promise our viewers that you will be happy to answer questions if they have?
Sure.
Please do write to us if you have any question or query or comment. Our email address is eurekarstv@gmail.com. It was fascinating talking to you. I'm so thankful that we could meet here. It was touch and go, and you could have gone back to UK without this interview. I'm extremely thankful.
Not at all.
Thanks
It's a pleasure.
We'll come back next week with another fascinating personality, a scientist of outstanding nature. Please do keep watching Eureka.